Okay, today we are going to do some more fractions, adding and subtracting fractions. Here's another little comic for you because I think they're funny. Okay, so 5-3, adding and subtracting fractions. This should be a review for you guys, but we're still going to do them anyway. Okay, so adding and subtracting fractions. Remember, the key to adding and subtracting fractions is a common denominator. You have to have a common denominator in order to add your fractions together. So on these, the common denominator is already there. Okay, so remember that you just add the numerator, the top number. So on this one, 1 plus 3 is 4, and you keep the denominator. Do not add your denominators together, you just keep them. Okay, and remember how I said last chapter that from now on you always reduce, so you do not leave it as 4/8. You have to reduce. So divide by 4, so it should be 1/2. If you already knew that 4/8 was 1/2, you do not have to show that work right there. Okay, so one thing that you haven't done with fractions yet is that you're going to get some negatives as well. And just like we did before, 3 minus 5 is -2 over 7. Or you could put negative, it doesn't matter where that negative is. You could even put it with the 7 if you wanted. Most of the time you're going to see it like this, where it's just a negative. The whole thing is negative, so it doesn't matter where it goes. Okay, so it's going to be negative. And remember our 7, we just keep our 7. If you want to put the negative, that would look weird, but you can do that. Okay, as we go on to number 3, what is our common denominator? Just because it's a variable, that doesn't matter. Okay, you just keep it the same, and you add 9 and 7 and get 16. There you go, you just leave it. 16 over x. We might say, what is this? If x is equal to 20, then it would be 16 over 20. And then you would reduce it. Okay, but for right now, you just leave that common denominator. Same with number 4. Our denominator is just xy. Since they're the same, we don't have to do anything. And then 11 plus 5 is 16 again. Okay, so then you'd be done with those. All right. So our next ones, they do not have a common denominator, so we have to find our common denominator. Okay, so when we find a common denominator, I'm just going to show you one way. There's other ways out there. I'm just going to show you this way to keep from getting confused. Okay, I personally, this is how it'll be written, but I personally think it's easier to do it like this. Okay, and then when we find our common denominator, okay, remember common denominator is a common multiple. If you can find the least common multiple, that's the easiest, but you don't have to. You just have to reduce at the end. So our least common multiple for 8 and 6 would be 24. But if you couldn't think of that, you can just do, okay, 8 times 6 is 48, so I know that'll be common. You could do that. It's just that you're going to have to reduce more at the end. Okay, so when you do this, remember to find a common denominator, we do 8 times what gives me 24? Well, 8 times 3, so then you do the 1 times 3, the numerator, so it's going to be 3/24. So remember back a few sections, 1/8 is the same as 3/24. They're equivalent fractions. You're just making equivalent fractions that make it easy to subtract. So 6 times 4 is 24, 5 times 4 is 20. So now we have 3 minus, remember this minus sign, 3 minus 20, okay, which is -17, and then you keep your denominator. So don't freak out if you get a negative, that's fine. Your denominator will stay the same as 24. If you'd used 48 here, you would have had to have reduced here. Okay, but 17/24 doesn't reduce, so you just leave it. Okay? Okay, so over here, the best way to find a common denominator is to look at the bigger number. If the smaller number will go into the bigger number, you know that's your common denominator. Okay, so 7/8. So our common denominator is 8. Okay, you could have used 24, you could have used 16, you just have to reduce more at the end. Okay, so let's say 4 times 2 gives me 8, so 3 times 2 gives me 6. This is just 8 times 1, so this would stay the same. Okay, and this is a plus, which I forgot to write. So 7 and 6 is 13, right? 13 eighths. Okay, so depending on what it says, most of the time we're not going to want to leave it as an improper fraction. We're going to make it into a mixed number. So do you guys remember how to do that? 8 goes into 13 how many times? Because remember, this is just a division problem. 8 goes into 13 once, with how many left over? With 5 left over, 5 over 8. If you can't remember how to do that, you can just divide. Remember last section we said it's just a division problem. So this is just 8 into 13. It goes once, and there's 5 left over. This would go 5 over 8. So 1 and 5/8. Okay? All right, as we do the next one, so we have, now this one has an x in it, but don't let that stress you out, because those aren't the numbers we have to deal with. We have 1/8 minus 5x over 6, so it's very similar to this number 5 up here, except for that we have an x now. Okay, but what is our common denominator? Is still going to be the same. Our common denominator is going to be 24. We still do it the same way. Okay, 8 times 3 is 24, 1 times 3, so this would be 3 over 24. 6 times 4 is 24, so 5x times 4 would be what? 20x. Okay, and remember it's subtraction, so it's going to be 3 minus 20x. Can we subtract those? Why or why not? Okay. Remember, you cannot subtract these because they are unlike terms. They are not common. They are not like terms. I gotta try to erase that little equal sign there. That little mark I made. Okay, you cannot subtract these because this isn't 3x. So this would be your answer. You would just leave it just like this. Okay. You could reduce it if all 3 of the numbers would reduce by the same number. Okay, if this was a 4 right here, then you could reduce it all, but it's not, so we're not going to. Oops. Okay, one more page. Okay, add and subtract mixed numbers. Okay, so when we're adding and subtracting mixed numbers, it's a few more steps. Okay, do not just add the 2 and the 3, don't just add the 5, you have to make it into improper fraction. Okay, so improper fractions. Okay, so remember how to do that. You multiply. So if I have 5 and 3/4, remember we multiply and then add. Okay, multiply and then we add. Okay, so 5 and 4 is 20. Plus 3, 23 over 4. If I'm going too fast here, then pause it and think about it. 5 and 4 is 20 plus 3, and then you keep your same denominator. The 7/8 we don't need to change. Okay, so we have 23 over 4 plus 7/8. I'm actually going to erase this 7/8 and put it below it so we can have more room. So plus 7/8, we have to find a common denominator. Okay, so our common denominator is going to be 8. So this would stay as 7/8. 4 times 2, 23 times 2. Oh my gosh, you have to do multiplication. What is that, 46? Right, and we're adding. So 46 plus 7 is what, 53 over 8? Okay, so 53 over 8, again, we have to change it back to a mixed number. So 8 goes into 53. How many times? Well, where do I want to write this? So 8 and 5 is 40, 8 and 6 is 48, 8 and 7 is 56, so 8 and 6, so 50, so remember it's just division. 53, 8 goes into 53, what did I say, 6 times? So that'd be 48, so that'd be 5 over 8. So make sure this is right. Go back and check. So it's just the opposite. 6 times 8 is 48 plus 5, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. Okay, so 6 and 5/8. You see how you can't just add 5 and that to get 6 and 5/8. Okay, so going over here, 2 times 3, so remember we multiply, then we add. 2 times 3 is 6, 7, 8/3, plus 1 times 4 is 4, plus 3 is 7/4. Okay, so our common denominators, so we have 8/3 plus 7/4. Our common denominator would be what? It's going to be 12. You could use 24 if you wanted, but you're just going to have to reduce more at the end. Okay, so let's try 3 times 4 gives me 12, 8 times 4 gives me 32, 4 times 3 is 12, 7 times 3 is 21. Are we adding? We're still adding. See, sometimes you got to look back. So 353 over 12. These are numbers we're not used to. Okay, so 12 goes into 5, so then you have to change it back to a mixed number. 12, 24, 36, what is it, 48? This is like the same one over here. 4 and 5/12. Yep. Okay. So there's lots of steps, but just take your time and do it correctly.